Matt Roloff has spent the better part of 2 decades being the undeniable center of gravity on this show. The farm is his. The vision is his. The personality that carried Little People Big World from a TLC curiosity into a genuinely long-running cultural fixture. That's his too. So when Amy not only left the marriage but brought another man into the Roloff orbit, into filming days, into family gatherings that used to be Matt's territory, the dynamic that emerged was never going to be simple. The tension between Matt Roloff and Chris Marek isn't a rumor. It's visible if you know what to look for. What's worth actually talking about is how it got there, what's driving it, and what it means for Amy, who is the one person stuck right in the middle. Let me be clear about what I'm working with here. I'm not going to tell you there was a screaming match that producers had to physically break up. I've seen that claim circulating, and I don't have any credible sourcing for it. What I do have is years of filmed footage, documented reporting on the farm sale negotiations, public statements from both Matt and Amy, and a pretty readable pattern of behavior across multiple seasons. My read on their dynamic is based on that. Where I'm guessing, I'll say so. Chris Marek came into Amy's life around 2016, and by the time their relationship went public, the divorce from Matt was still relatively fresh. Matt and Amy had separated in 2016 after over 25 years of marriage. That's a long time. The farm, the show, the kids, the public identity, all of it was built together. When Amy started showing up to filming with Chris, it introduced a variable that Matt genuinely didn't have a script for. And Matt Roloff, whatever you think of him, is a man who likes to have a script. The discomfort between Matt and Chris has surfaced on camera more than once, and it tends to show up the same way every time. Matt gets performatively gracious and just slightly too formal. There's a version of politeness that reads as warmth, and then there's the version that reads as, I am tolerating your presence. Matt tends toward the second. I'm not saying that makes him a villain. Watching your ex-wife bring her new partner to your farm, which is also a television set, which is also the place your kids grew up, is not a situation that calls for easy feelings. But the performance of it is visible. Chris, for his part, has generally handled the situation with more quiet than I'd have expected. He doesn't insert himself into the bigger family arguments. He shows up for Amy. He said publicly that he tries to stay in his lane around the Roloff family dynamics, which is probably the right instinct. But staying in your lane doesn't resolve the underlying tension. It just keeps the lid on. The thing that actually changed the temperature between Matt and Chris, from what's been reported and what's visible in the later seasons, is the farm. The Roloff Farm has been the physical center of this show for nearly 20 years. It's also a working business, with pumpkin season drawing real revenue, with the property having significant value in the Oregon real estate market. When Matt started talking about selling portions of the farm, or selling it outright, the first people he approached were his own kids. Zach and Jeremy both, at different points, were in conversations with Matt about buying in. Those negotiations failed. Matt and Zach's falling out over the farm sale is well documented at this point. Zach and Tori ended up moving to Washington. Jeremy and Audrey have their own enterprise that moved away from the farm story entirely. What's less discussed is how Amy fits into the financial picture of all of this, and where Chris Marek's presence complicates it. Amy received a cash settlement when she and Matt divorced and sold her share of the farm back to Matt. She bought her own house in Helvetia, Oregon. She built a separate life. And then she married a man who, professionally, is a real estate agent and who, by all accounts from what's been publicly reported, has his own business interests separate from the Roloff farm. The question of whether Chris has ever had any kind of financial entanglement with Matt is, to my knowledge, not documented anywhere credible. I want to be honest about that gap rather than fill it with invented drama. What is documented is that Amy's relationship with the farm changed dramatically after the divorce. She sold her share. She doesn't own any of it, but she still films there, still has emotional ties to it, and still has kids who are part of its story. Chris Marek married into a family where his wife's most significant asset, her decades of history, her public identity, her relationship with her children's childhood home, belongs to her ex-husband. That's a genuinely unusual arrangement to navigate. My read, and I want to be clear, this is my read and not a reported fact, is that Matt finds Chris's presence in this world mildly intolerable and has found increasingly less reason to hide it as the show has gone on. The early seasons post-divorce had Matt performing civility pretty convincingly. The more recent seasons, you can feel the performance getting thinner. Part of that is probably just Matt's general arc. He's gotten less interested in managing his image the way he used to. The farm sale fallout with Zach was public, ugly, and Matt didn't soften it much. He made his case directly. That's a different Matt than the one who spent years carefully navigating the divorce narrative on camera. There's also something worth acknowledging about what the farm's future means in practical terms. If the farm eventually gets sold, and there's been reporting suggesting Matt has been in conversations about selling portions or all of it, Amy doesn't have a financial stake in that outcome. She already cashed out, but her kids do, or at least they have emotional stakes in it. Zach's falling out with Matt was specifically about the terms Matt offered when Zach tried to buy in. By some accounts, those terms felt punishing. I'm working from reporting on this and from what was shown on the show. I don't have inside knowledge of the actual negotiation. What that context does is it puts Amy in a strange position where the most consequential financial and emotional decisions about a place that defined her adult life are entirely out of her control. Matt makes those calls, and her new husband, who married her knowing all of this, is watching from a position where he has no leverage and no standing to intervene. That's a recipe for friction even without any specific incident triggering it. The on-camera moments where you can actually feel the Matt-Chris tension tend to cluster around family events, pumpkin season, holiday gatherings, anytime the camera is rolling and both men are in proximity. Matt has a habit of subtly repositioning himself as the host, the authority, the man who built this. Chris has a habit of being present but peripheral. The geometry of it is interesting to watch if you're paying attention. There was a segment in one of the later seasons, I'm not going to pretend I remember exactly which episode, where Matt and Amy were discussing something about the property and Chris was nearby. And the camera caught Matt's expression shift in a way that communicated a fairly specific kind of annoyance. Editors kept it in. Whether that was deliberate or just a moment that didn't get cut, I don't know. But it's the kind of thing that accumulates. Amy has talked in interviews about trying to manage her dual loyalties. She's been candid about the fact that being at the farm is complicated now. She loves the place. She raised her kids there. She also knows that going there means existing in Matt's space, on Matt's terms, with Matt's new partner Caryn Chandler also in the picture. The Caryn element gets underplayed in a lot of coverage, but it matters. Matt has been with Caryn for years now, and Caryn worked on the farm before she and Matt got together. There's history there that made Amy visibly uncomfortable in earlier seasons. Both sides of this have moved on, and both sides are also still navigating what moving on actually looks like in a situation where you share a television show. Chris has done something smart, which is that he's largely refused to get pulled into the Matt drama on camera. He seems to understand that the moment he becomes a combatant in the Matt and Amy extended conflict, he loses. The audience's loyalty, at least among the long-term LPBW viewers, is complicated and tribal. People who've watched since the beginning have strong feelings about Matt, strong feelings about Amy, and varying degrees of warmth for Chris, depending on how they've processed the divorce. Chris stepping back from the drama is probably the right move, even if it sometimes reads as passive. The financial dimension that I do think is genuinely worth examining is Amy's book and speaking career, which became her main public-facing income stream after the divorce. She wrote a memoir, she does motivational speaking. That's a real business she built. Chris supports it and has shown up at events. But it's still Amy's thing, built on the Roloff name, built on the LPBW story, which means it's still built partially on what she and Matt created together. The post-divorce financial independence that Amy talks about is real, but it's not fully clean of the shared history either. I'm not saying that's a problem. I'm saying it adds texture to why these relationships don't fully separate, no matter how much everyone involved might prefer they would. The question I keep coming back to is what the end game looks like here. Matt has signaled, through actions more than words, that he's thinking about what comes after the farm in its current form. The pumpkin seasons continue, but they're not growing. The family dynamic that made the show compelling is genuinely fractured. Zach is in Washington. Jeremy stepped back from filming. The younger kids are adults with their own lives. The show has been running long enough that the original audience has grown up, and whatever version of LPBW exists now is catering to a much different viewer than the one who started watching in 2006. Chris Marek, in all of this, is the newest variable in a system that's been running for a very long time. He didn't create the tensions that exist. The Roloff family was already complicated before he arrived, but his presence highlights them, because Amy's happiness with someone else is a kind of data point about the end of the marriage that Matt can't entirely neutralize with charm. Here's where I'll speculate openly so you can take it for what it's worth. I think Matt finds it harder than he lets on to watch Amy settle and content in her new life, while the farm's future is uncertain and his relationships with his kids are strained. Caryn's presence has given him stability, and I don't want to minimize that, but the farm, the physical, economic legacy piece of everything he built, is in a genuinely complicated place, and the man who married his ex-wife gets to show up to pumpkin season without any of that weight. I think that lands differently than Matt would probably admit publicly. Amy's position in all of this is the one that genuinely earns some attention. She spent years being defined by this family story, went through a very public divorce, rebuilt her life, married someone she clearly loves, and she's still filming. Still going back to the farm, still doing the family reunion episodes with Matt. There's probably a version of this where she just walked away from the show entirely and let the Roloff story become Matt's to tell alone. She didn't do that. Whether that's because she needs the income, or because she's still emotionally tied to the story, or because she genuinely wants to document her life on camera, I honestly don't know. Probably some combination. What I do know is that staying in the story means Chris stays in the story too. And that means the low-grade friction between him and Matt isn't going away anytime soon, because the conditions that create it aren't going away. They share a show, an extended family, and the continuing presence of cameras that have been capturing this particular family's life since Amy's kids were in elementary school. The specific flashpoint that people are most curious about, whether there's been a genuine blow-up between Matt and Chris that cameras didn't capture, is something I genuinely can't confirm or deny. Rumors circulate around any long-running reality show, and the LPBW audience is attentive enough that real incidents tend to surface eventually in some form. What's circulating online about a major confrontation between the two of them reads to me as speculation that got reported as facts somewhere and then spread. I could be wrong, but I'm not going to present it as documented when I haven't seen credible sourcing. What I can say is that you don't need an invented blow-up to tell an interesting story here. The real situation has enough texture. Two men who both clearly love Amy in very different ways, with very different relationships to the place that defines the show, navigating a family dynamic that reality television has both documented and distorted for nearly 2 decades. The tension doesn't require a screaming match to be real. The thing that makes Amy's situation genuinely complicated, and I think this gets lost in the more salacious coverage, is that she is the connective tissue between all of it. She's connected to Matt through their kids and through their shared history, which is real even if the marriage ended. She's connected to Chris through her actual present life. She's connected to the farm through memory and identity, even though she no longer owns any of it. Every time a camera crew shows up, all of those connections are being activated at once. Chris Marek handles that with more equanimity than most people would, honestly. Watching your wife go back to her ex-husband's farm to film a television show about the family she had before you is not a normal feature of marriage. He has chosen, at least publicly, to support it rather than resist it. Whether that's entirely how he feels about it privately is not something any of us can know. Matt has his own version of this. He is the architect of a family story that has grown beyond what he can fully control. His kids have complicated feelings about him. His ex-wife is happy with someone else. His farm's future is genuinely uncertain, and the show keeps rolling. What I'd actually be curious to hear from the audience on is this. Do you think Amy should have walked away from filming entirely when she remarried? Or does her continuing presence on the show make sense to you? Not in a what does it mean for the drama way, but in a genuine question about whether you think it serves her life or costs her something. That's the thing I go back and forth on when I think about where this show is now and where it's heading. The Roloff family has given reality television something fairly rare, which is a story that has actually evolved over time instead of just recycling the same conflicts. Evolution isn't always comfortable to watch, but the fact that it's real, that these are actual people with actual complicated relationships, is what's kept it going far longer than most shows in its genre manage to survive. Matt and Chris's tension is a real part of that story. I just think it's more interesting when you tell it honestly than when you dress it up in fabricated incidents.